We are currently joined by Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. Senator Cruz, good to talk to you.
Ben, always good to be with you.
So let's begin with, obviously, the presidential race. So the media have declared that if you refuse to say that Joe Biden is president-elect, somehow you violated the Constitution and a coup is at hand. This seems like a bizarre narrative to me. The presidential election has not yet been declared over by anybody who counts. And when media outlets call elections, that is just a projection. That is not an actual official act. The Constitution does not demand that anybody concede. All of the states not a single state has yet certified its vote. Not a single elector has voted. What do you make of the media's overwrought demands that President Trump concede, that Republicans call Joe Biden the president-elect, or that a coup is taking place?
Well, it's bizarre, it's lawless, and it's utterly inconsistent with the Constitution. The media doesn't have the authority to select our president. It's the American people who make that choice, and that is the decision is made when the election is over and the ballots are counted and the legal process is concluded. And, I would note 20 years ago, this very same media made an announcement on election night. They announced Al Gore as the next president of the United States. And I remember well, I was working on the George W. Bush campaign at the time. I remember the crushing disappointment with that announcement. And then they all had to eat crow because they had one minor problem, that as they counted the votes, George W. Bush had won Florida. Even though the margin was narrow, we had 36 days of recounts and litigation in Florida. I was part of the legal team representing Bush in that matter. And it wasn't till 36 days later, till the litigation was complete, till the matter was settled pursuant to law, that we knew who the 43rd president of the United States would be. Today, the media doesn't want to have that same respect for the rule of law. They hate Donald Trump, and so the instant they were able to call it for Joe Biden, they did, and now they're trying just to scream at anybody who wants to actually follow the law rather than accept their choice for who they want to be president.
Now, I'm unaware of any Republican, any elected Republican, or really any commentator, Senator Cruz, who has proclaimed that after the votes are certified, after the states certify their votes, after the electors vote, if they vote for Joe Biden, that there will not be a peaceful transfer of power. And yet the media continue to insist that's exactly what's going to happen, that even if the votes are certified, even if the votes are certified on behalf of Joe Biden, even if the electors meet and then select Joe Biden, that Donald Trump is going to remain in the White House and he will be backed by his cadre of sycophantic Republicans who are going to hole up in the White House like Al Pacino at the end of Scarface, snorting cocaine and firing guns through the door while shouting about meeting their little friend. I've seen no evidence of this whatsoever. It seems like every Republican is saying basically the same thing, which is there's a process, it's going to carry forward, and then we'll have an outcome.
Well, I'm just happy at the image of say hello to my little friend. That makes my entire day. Being Cuban American, there are certain cultural icons that resonate. It's interesting. I actually think someone should write a book about the Freudian projection of leftists, because the consistency of it is eerie. Every single thing they accuse us of doing, they accuse conservatives, they accuse their political opponents of doing, is in fact what they're doing. So they are claiming that conservatives are undermining the legitimacy of the election. Look, the left spent 4 years proclaiming Donald Trump was an illegitimate president, refusing to accept the legitimacy of his presidency. Stacey Abrams still thinks she's governor of Georgia. I mean, they live in this bizarre fantasy world. And actually, when it comes to violently resisting the transition of power, it was leftists who were saying, that there was going to be violence in the streets. You noticed when Al Gore was leading, when the networks projected it for Al Gore, you didn't see a bunch of Trump supporters start breaking into stores and looting. And I got to tell you, in Washington, D.C., there were a whole lot of buildings boarded up. And it wasn't because they were afraid of marauding Trump supporters. It's because the Biden camp had made very clear that if their guy doesn't win, they expected people to engage in violence. And it's clear all the store owners believed it because they put plywood on all their windows. So everyone in the media just needs to calm down. There will be a peaceful transition of power, either to Joe Biden or to the second term of Donald Trump. And which that will be determined by the operation of law. There are multiple legal challenges pending in multiple states. Those legal challenges have to get resolved. They have to get resolved pursuant to state law, pursuant to federal law. pursuant to the Constitution, and that will happen, and it will happen in a matter of weeks. We're not talking months. It will happen between now and January 20th, and we will know the president soon, but we have to do so consistent with law, despite the temper tantrums thrown by the mainstream media.
Now, Senator Cruz, it is, I think, important to mention here that when it comes to the law, what's amazing about this is the media, it doesn't seem to be a genuine panic. Because the fact is that in order for the Trump campaign to overturn results in places like Pennsylvania or Georgia or Arizona, they would have to demonstrate not just that voter fraud and irregularity exists, because in a country with 150 million voters, you presume that there will be some voter fraud and some voter irregularity. They actually have to show by burden of law that would have impacted the outcome of the election. Well, when you're talking about Pennsylvania, where right now about 45,000 votes separate the two candidates, that's a pretty high burden of proof. And yet the media are hysterically shouting that any lawsuit that is filed is a danger to the republic.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is a topic actually that I discussed in depth in my latest podcast, which we recorded last night. It should be coming out sometime today. But more briefly, there is one significant reason for optimism and one significant reason for concern. The reason for optimism, if you look at how this election during COVID played out, of the ballots cast on election day, the ballots cast in person, Trump won the significant majority of those ballots. Of the ballots cast early by mail, Biden won the significant majority of those ballots. If you look historically at election challenges, either recounts or contest litigation, where you're assessing whether ballots were cast legally or illegally, mail-in ballots have a much higher percentage of being rejected as not complying with the law. In-person ballots, by and large, the count on election day stays pretty solid, but you do consistently get some significant percentage of mail-in ballots that when examined closely, are found to be contrary to law. That means, and the good sign there is, as the recounts proceed, as the litigation proceeds, it is likely to see a higher percentage of Biden votes being deemed contrary to law than in-person Trump votes. That's the encouraging sign. Here's the discouraging side. To win, the Trump legal team has to run the table. It has to win in multiple states, and it can't drop the ball. That means, and it's got a big margin. Pennsylvania, the margin right now for Joe Biden is about 45,000 votes. That's a lot of votes. Michigan, the margin is well over 100,000 votes. That's even more votes. All of these margins are big, and for the Trump campaign to succeed in reversing the outcome that the media has called, they've got to win not just in one state, but multiple states. That's not an easy thing to do, but we won't know if they've succeeded or not until the legal process is played out, which is what, under the rule of law, we've got to do.
Let's talk about the broader impact of the election. So the media suggested that Republicans were going to just get walloped across the board. That not only didn't happen, Republicans picked up anywhere from 10 to 17 seats in the House, which is insane. Like, literally no one called that. It may end up being a 7-seat majority for Democrats in the House of Representatives, which is down from well into the 30s, which is an incredible thing. Plus, it looks like Republicans have a very solid shot of retaining the majority in the Senate. They just called the race, the media just called the race in Alaska for Dan Sullivan, which means that Republicans have 50 senators right now. They would have to lose both seats in Georgia in order not to end up with a majority in the Senate. So let's first talk about sort of the generalized takeaway that you get from this particular race and this particular election. And then we can talk about Georgia, where I think Republican focus needs to turn forthwith. Now, my takeaway from this election is that more than anything else, this was a rejection of the far left. Regardless of what people thought about Trump or Biden, regardless of what they thought about Trump's personal popularity or non-popularity, the reality is that across the board, they simply rejected the radical left to the extent that they almost got rid of a bunch of quote-unquote moderate Democrats who also were at war with the radical left. There's a reason that infighting is breaking out among the Democrats, and it's because they're realizing that their sort of woke liberal coalition is not going to hold.
I think you're exactly right, and one of the people who agree with you are the Democrats. They're having screaming matches. Nancy Pelosi may well lose her speaker's gavel over letting the far left dominate and drive the Democratic Party. I do have to take one nit with something you said a second ago, which is you said absolutely nobody predicted this, big gains in the House. And the nit, I would say, is actually, I predicted this and said quite vocally and aggressively that was going to happen. You may recall a couple of months ago, I launched an initiative called 25 for 20, where I picked 25 candidates for the House of Representatives, 23 of whom were challengers, were either running in open seats or against Democrats. And I raised over $3 million for these 25 candidates. I went out and campaigned with them, campaigned in their districts, did rallies, turned people out. And I said over and over and over again that we have an enormous opportunity to go after Nancy Pelosi, to make gains in the House. And of current count of those 25, 13 of them won. And we've got some strong principled conservatives. We've got 2 more that are outstanding. So we may get 15 of the 25 who won. Not only that, on the Senate, I spent the last 5 days of the election on the road campaigning with my colleagues in the Senate. I was in 5 states in 5 days, was in North Carolina, Montana, Iowa, Arizona, and Texas, campaigning with senators in each of those states. We won 4 of the 5. Unfortunately, we didn't win Arizona, but we won everywhere else. And the result of all of this, our ideas work. Look, here's the takeaway you get from this election. Our ideas work. The American people, they don't want to defund the police. The American people, they don't want socialism. They don't want radically higher taxes. They don't want to gut the military. They don't want the Green New Deal. They don't want to destroy jobs. They don't want to shut down the economy. They don't want to pack the court. They don't want radical leftist judges. Our ideas work. That's the overwhelming conclusion from this election. Okay. What happens at the presidential race, I don't know. That's going to be resolved in litigation, but there is reason to be very encouraged from the results in both the House and Senate in this election.
So let's talk for a second about the election in Georgia. So right now it comes down to 2 special elections that happened before the inauguration, and the Republicans must have the upper hand there. I mean, number one, you had an election in which David Perdue actually beat John Ossoff by over 100,000 votes, it looks like right now. And didn't win because Georgia has this rule that you have to win an outright majority of the votes. He's going to be running again against Ossoff, this time with all of the nation focused on that particular race. Ossoff has now lost a contested race to Karen Handel for Congress. He has lost a race to David Perdue, and I hope that he will lose a 3rd race to David Perdue in the near future. And then Kelly Loeffler is running against Raphael Warnock, who is a reverend who happens to be an extraordinarily far-left figure, wildly anti-Israel, socialistic in his economics. Georgia is not that deep blue. I mean, for all the talk about Georgia flipping blue this election cycle, the Republicans down ballot did outperform President Trump. And you got to imagine that the Democrats cannot count on the kind of over turnout that they got from certain portions of the population who voted early and voted in huge numbers because they were motivated by Trump and by Biden. A lot of those people are not going to show up to vote in a special Senate election, but you would imagine that Republicans are going to show up in mass numbers to deny Chuck Schumer control of the United States Senate.
Well, maybe. I hope so. I think the stakes are staggeringly high. We're right now 52-48. If we win both Georgia's Senate seats, the Republicans keep control. If we lose them both, Chuck Schumer's majority leader. Chuck Schumer was caught on a live mic saying, "Win Georgia, change the world." That is exactly what their agenda is. And I got to tell you, it is going to be an epic battle. I think it could be $400 or $500 million spent in Georgia in the next 2 months, which is insane. That is practically a singing telegram sent to each and every voter with a complimentary foot massage. I mean that the onslaught on Georgia. And let me give a little caution. I worry that Republicans and conservatives are a little bit complacent because Georgia has been historically red. Let me tell you how Georgia goes south. Georgia goes the wrong direction if some significant percentage of Trump voters are angry about the presidential, are ticked off, and decide to hell with it, I'm not showing up. And it doesn't. We're not talking 100%. We're talking 2, 3, 5% that are so frustrated at the result of the top of the ticket, they decide to stay home. And if that is combined with massive turnout on the left, we could wake up on January 5th, or still be sleeping off our Christmas dinners and our New Year's Eve, and we could wake up to a Chuck Schumer Senate, which is at that point Katie bar the door for every leftist, socialist pipe dream agenda that is being driven up by Warren and Sanders and AOC and the far left.
Senator Cruz, appreciate the time.
Ben, thank you.